Just remember, we're a couple in the kitchen trying not to set it on fire. Hi guys, and I am SBShoes of TwoShoes Kitchen, and today I'm going to be teaching you guys how to make rosemary focaccia bread. I'm using a recipe from the Irish Times, so I had to do a little bit of conversion, but this is by far my favorite way to make focaccia. It's actually quite easy, it's just a little bit time consuming. So with that, let's get started and talk about the ingredients you're gonna need. Of course, you're gonna need an all-purpose flour. Any will do. We normally prefer to use King Arthur, but we're out of that. So we make do with what we've got, especially in quarantine. You're gonna definitely need some good olive oil. Splurge and get the better stuff. My preference is generally an olive oil from Lebanon or Syria or Jordan or Palestine. You can find those in Middle Eastern shops. But a good Italian or Spanish variety will also do the trick quite nicely. You'll also just need some regular granulated sugar for a tiny bit of sweetness. Of course, you'll need some active dry yeast, fresh rosemary if you can get it, and of course some nice kosher salt. As Simeon Nostrat often says, kosher salt is really a high quality salt. You can buy it for relatively cheap. Diamond crystal is what we use, and it gives a nice flavor and you get more of the texture. So with that in mind, let's get started on the actual putting together process. This is about a 3 to 4 hour process. Of course, this video is not going to be that long. What I've done is I've already started and I've put together the dry ingredients and the wet ingredients that I will add together. I'm just going to show you real quick some of the dry ingredients. I'm going to move the camera. I'm going to show you just what it should look like. As you can see, it's going to be nice and uniform in color. Sorry about the live bit about my dog. He likes to bark at everything. Anyway, you just want to give this a good stir. Make sure everything's evenly put together. In the dry ingredients, you're gonna have 4 cups of flour. You're gonna have about a teaspoon of the yeast, a teaspoon of the sugar, and 3/4 of the teaspoon of salt. Once that's all mixed together, you're gonna add in about 40 milliliters, which is just about 1/8 of a cup of olive oil, and you'll have 250 milliliters of water, which I did not do the math for you, I'm sorry, but most measuring cups will show you what 250 milliliters looks like. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna add them together now. I'm gonna stick that to the side. Actually, I'm gonna get more of that nice olive oil. You wanna make sure that you really emphasize in this recipe preserving as much olive oil as possible. The more olive oil that's in your dough is going to help elevate the flavor. Now the other thing is when you're combining the dough and the wet ingredients, if your dough does not look moist, add more water and maybe add a little more olive oil. Baking is a science, but baking also is intuitive. So never forget that you want to really pay attention to what you're putting together. I'm mixing it with a spatula. Again, I'm gonna come show you a little bit of how it's looking in the process. So yeah, it's gonna look a little bit mealy, a little bit broken up. I may get my hands dirty here in a minute. Whenever you are mixing dough by hand, remember that you can either wet your hands with water or you can put flour on them. I tend to find that the wet hand method is a little bit easier. Not perfect, it's not a perfect science, and I'm certainly not an expert, just a cook in the kitchen figuring it out. And like I was telling you guys, see this here? That's not going to be moist enough. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add in more water. I'm actually going to use the same bowl I had the water and the olive oil already mixed in together, so that way, again, I'm maximizing the use of my olive oil, because this bread will just taste divine the more that you ensure that the olive oil is preserved and not put to waste. If you're not comfortable with kind of eyeing it, my advice would be is to go about 1/8 to 1/4 of a cup at a time in incorporating water. For some of you who are watching, I have already done a little bit of a class about how to make a no-knead roll. And like I explained to you all, you have to have some faith in yourself that you know what a nice moist dough looks like. And this is already getting better. I've put in about maybe 1/4 of a cup so far of water mixed with a little bit of oil. I wouldn't add too much oil though, because you can over oil it, and then it'll put you perhaps in not the best of places. But I think there are much worse things than an oily dough. An overly wet dough, obviously you'll need to add back in some flour. Do that just sprinkles at a time, no more than a spoonful, just because adding flour back into a dough once it's super wet, it's a little bit trickier than adding the water when it's too dry. As you can go slowly, I've probably put in 2/3 of a cup of extra water by now. Remember that with baking, climate has a big impact. So for example, today it's rainy. Sorry, I'm making sure I can still see my recipe on my screen. And today is rainy and it's a little bit colder, so it will affect how the yeast rises. So I'm probably going to use my oven's warm setting. Okay, so that's closer to 2/3 of a cup that I've added in, but again, add it in slowly. Don't add it in all at the same time. You may seriously regret how much you've added if you do it all at once. And again, the way that the dough reacts, it definitely can be a matter of temperature in your house or outside, or a little bit of both. Moisture in your house is another thing. So there's a lot of science to it, but basically all that to say, just be aware that on a colder day, when you let your dough rise, you may want to give it a little more help. Okay, cool. All right, so now the dough is looking much better, and I think it's ready to go to the mixer. Let me just bring it on up. Thanks for being patient with me, guys. Yeah, see, look at that, that's much better. It's not perfect, but we're also about to put it with the kneading hook, so that's going to make it all the better. So okay, now we are over at the mixer. If you guys have a mixer, this is really the easiest way to do it. Simply make sure you have your dough hook here, put it down. You need it for 10 minutes, so I would go ahead and have a timer set, so we're gonna go do that now. And I like to put mine on about a 4 or a 6 depending. I'm gonna put it at 4 for now, and we'll check back in 10 minutes to see how it goes. As a continuation, while that's kneading behind me, you're gonna want to get another bowl to transfer the kneaded dough into. So what I normally do is I've got this large Pyrex bowl that can actually stand the heat that the warm setting on your oven can handle. So what I wanna do is I'm gonna just take this bowl, I'm gonna take my olive oil. Again, We love olive oil in this recipe. I love it every day, but you know, not everybody shares my deep passion for olive oil. So what I'm gonna do is I am just going to pour this in. This is great and awkward. I'm gonna pour in just a little bit. I'd say the equivalent of maybe 1.5 tablespoons to 2 tablespoons. Just gonna take my hands and I'm going to rub it along the outside of the bowl, because when I transfer that kneaded dough into here, it's gonna need the olive oil to help keep it hydrated while I let it rise in the oven for an hour. If you do decide to knead your dough, you brave soul, you, my advice is that you really treat it like a workout for your arms, because I guarantee you that's exactly what it's gonna be. And I would also give yourself, if you're not the best at kneading dough, I'd give yourself more like 12 minutes of kneading rather than 10 to make sure that your dough is nice and smooth and consistent. So now that we have our oiled bowl, it's ready to get the dough once we finish with the kneading. Okay, now that we've done the kneading and you can see this really gorgeous dough, all I have to do is scoop it out. If it wants to come. Come on. I am reminded that baking makes me a humble woman, because it will all do whatever it wants, and I am simply trying to learn as best as I can. Okay, almost there. You guys can see it coming on out. It's nicely kneaded. All right. So now that we have it all out, the recipe encourages you to use cling wrap. My super duper awesome Pyrex bowl actually comes with a top, and that's worked well for me in the past. What I do is I do rub olive oil into it so that it won't stick should the dough rise and touch it. But now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put it in and let it rise for an hour. Remember, the rising is really important, and you'll want to make sure that it's done well. So find a warm spot but not a hot spot, wherever that might be in your home, and get to it. See you guys in an hour. Hey guys, so we are done with the first proving stage, and I have pulled out the dough. The recipe calls for you to thin it out to about a 2-inch thick loaf, but let me show you how my dough turned out, because what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna just cheat. So thanks for bearing with me. All right, so you see here how it's nice and just supple, really just goes wherever I want it to. So with that in mind, I'm gonna actually just put it directly into the container that it's gonna eventually bake in. So with that in mind, here's where we're gonna be putting it in, and it's a, oh gosh, 11 by 15. That was embarrassing. Sorry. 11 by 15 casserole dish. You line it with paper, parchment paper. My dog is trying to eat my parchment paper as I'm trying to teach you guys. So we're gonna switch it up. Basically, what I'm gonna do is I am going to roll my dough away from it just a wee bit. Make sure that no dough gets left behind on my nice little mat here. If you don't have a dough mat, a kitchen mat, I strongly recommend that you get one. Anyway, so see how I'm just kind of like rolling this up into itself to a nice little blob here. I'm gonna actually put it in. And once I've done that, I'm gonna actually just roll it out with my fingers, just very gently into the parchment itself. You can also do this with a 9x13. I'm doing a bit of a thinner focaccia this time. Okay, maybe not. We're gonna transfer it to a different one, so be right. Okay, so we're back. I got a 9x13. Like I said, I'm not a professional baker. I'm not a professional chef. I am just someone who does a lot of cooking and has learned a thing or two, which is why I'm here to talk to you about how I go about it. Because again, sometimes we can get locked up into what the recipe says and there's not a lot of direction about how to handle certain things. So, okay, so with the smaller pan, I am just here spreading out the parchment paper a little bit. As you can see, it doesn't need to fit perfectly. You can see it's kind of going around in there. So the next step is actually to add in olive oil. Now, my personal strategy, because all the recipe talks about is, well, put a good bit of olive oil into the baking tray and go for it. So I'm gonna do oh gosh, okay, so I actually did a mistake. I put in the dough before the olive oil, which I'm actually glad I did it because I want to talk to you about how cool it is with this focaccia bread, this focaccia dough, because it's so supple that I'm actually able to get in the olive oil underneath the dough. So no harm, no foul. Definitely when you're working with recipes, please remember not to freak out if you don't get something right. As you all get to know me as a cook, as a baker, I definitely make mistakes, definitely get ahead of myself, and you know, it just kind of is what it is, and you will learn. And so this may not be a perfect process. Somebody may be watching this and being like, she is butchering the art of focaccia. You're probably right. But the fact of the matter is that learning how to troubleshoot and how to get this done is such a great growth process. You'll also be proud of yourself once you get it done right. So with that being said, let me show you what the oil level is that I use in my focaccia. Again, I like it nice and olive oily. So let's have a look. So we've got this beautiful looking dough. It is definitely soaked all up in the olive oil. So the next thing we want to do, the original recipe for this calls for blackberry and rosemary. I'm doing just rosemary and sea salt today because I like the straightforward and simple. I also don't have blackberries on hand, so it's not the end of the world that I don't have each and every ingredient as prescribed by the recipe. So with that, you take your cleaned rosemary and just sprinkle it all over the bread. Don't be shy. I'm certainly not shy with my rosemary. And what you're just doing is, this is going to be the fun stuff at the top that you see in nice pretty focaccia loaves everywhere, and we're going to make the holes next after we have scattered. And again, like, this is not a precise science. You don't have to get it right. It doesn't have to be the prettiest. It doesn't even have to be the most evenly done. It just needs to be done in order for you to have that flavoring going on. This being my first video for TwoShoes Kitchen, I am still also learning how to do this well, so thank you for your patience. Normally have people inside the house sitting in front of me as I do this so that they can see this hands-on. And so, all right, so there's the rosemary. I'm gonna put on the salt and then I'll show you, don't worry. Make sure you have an apron too, by the way. Aprons like save the day. They're my portable napkin. With salt, these salt holders are amazing. Just grab like a pinch of it. Be fancy, be Salt Bae, okay? I love Salt Bae. I love a good salty crust on my focaccia. You don't want to over salt it, but at the same time you have to be like dumping a lot of salt to over salt the focaccia. So I'm just letting the salt off of my hands go into there. And again, see how nice that looks. Yes, queen. All right, so what I'm gonna do now is I'm going to press holes into it. Again, like you would expect in focaccia, those nice little holes. So literally take your crab claw and just, I'll show you, don't worry. I know, I was feeling your anxiety, but don't worry, I'm gonna show you the crab claw. Okay, crab claw time. You don't have to go all the way to the bottom. Hope you like my sound effects. Just make sure it gets up to your first knuckle. Just go for it. Try to press in some of those rosemary bits too. It doesn't all have to go in, but it's a good idea to get some of it in. And that way, it'll just be amazeballs. All right. Yes, I did say amazeballs on camera. All right, now that we have this done, we're gonna prove it again for an hour. So I'll see you then. Okay, we are at the end of the second proof. So you should totally see our focaccia and how it's risen while we wait for the oven to preheat to 400 degrees. We're gonna put it in at 27 minutes and then it should be done. But let's quickly have a look at this risen dough. Oh my gosh, it's so beautiful. Look at that. Look at those bubbles. Ugh. I cannot wait to put this in the oven. Yep. It's gonna be great. So I'll see you guys in 27 minutes. And we're done, guys. So my focaccia has a bit of a browner top than some might prefer. It's not burnt, don't worry. Remember, I put mine in for 27 minutes. If you want a blonder focaccia, make sure you put it in for 25. But let me show you this lovely loaf. It smells amazing. There you have it, friends. Beautiful and smells absolutely delicious. You can even hear the gentle bubbling of the olive oil. So nice. And that's it. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. I hope you learned something new, or I hope you found this helpful, maybe even both, dare I say. Anyway, if you liked the video, please subscribe, or just share it, or send us a nice note. Either way, hope you have a great week and enjoy the focaccia.